Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this important panel discussion on anti-Muslim racism brought to you by the Ajax Public Library. I am so pleased that everyone could join us and our speakers for this important conversation. I'm Julia Campbell, Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Public Library. We bring you this program as part of Canadian Islamic History Month, which is celebrated in the month of October. This month recognizes the significant role that Muslim communities play in Canadian society and highlights their extraordinary contributions. Canadians have the opportunity to learn more about the history of Islam in Canada and to recognize the many achievements of Muslim Canadians in the arts, sports, academics, sciences, literature, and in their communities. It is also a time to acknowledge the ongoing challenges and barriers that Muslim Canadians face. This past year has been difficult for Muslim communities across Canada, as we have seen the horrific results of racism and hate. Together, we must combat all forms of discrimination, Islamophobia, and hate-fueled violence directed at Muslim communities across the country. And we must continue working towards a compassionate, inclusive, and safer Canada for everyone. Your host for this evening, along with myself, is Larry Rosen, Community Engagement Associate from the Ajax Public Library, who will be assisting behind the scenes tonight. We would like to begin this program by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas. More specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action and acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. And now just a couple of housekeeping items. If you experience any technical difficulties this evening, we recommend that you exit the webinar and re-enter. If you continue to have difficulties, please place a comment in the chat and a staff member will assist you. Tonight's program is being recorded and the link will be sent out following the program and posted to the Ajax Public Library YouTube page. Our format for this evening's program will include a presentation from each of our speakers, followed by a Q&A portion with our four panelists. I encourage you to enter any questions for our presenters into the Q&A feature, and we will address them following the presentations. We are so pleased to have the following speakers with us this evening: Dr. Barbara Perry, professor from Ontario Tech University; Badar Javaid, vice president of the Pickering Islamic Center; Kubra, president of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women in Durham; and Rizwan Mohammed, advocacy officer for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Our first panelist this evening is Dr. Barbara Perry. Barbara is a professor in the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities at Ontario Tech University and the director of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism. She has written extensively on hate crime and is currently working in the areas of anti-Muslim violence, anti-Semitic hate crime, the community impacts of hate crime, and right-wing extremism in Canada. She is regularly called upon by policymakers, practitioners, and local, national, and international media as an expert on hate crime and right-wing extremism. We are very fortunate to have her with us this evening, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Perry to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Julia. I didn't set a timer, so can you just sort of pop up on screen when I've got about 3 minutes left to go so I know?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation, Julia. I was just saying before we started what great work our public libraries are doing in the Durham region to really promote conversations, the hard conversations and the necessary conversations. And as you suggested, Julia, talking tonight about Islamophobia is, I mean, it's been a long-term issue for us, but certainly came to a very horrific conclusion, culmination this year with the murders of 4 family members in London, Ontario. So important that we have these conversations in the community and keep our minds and our ears and our eyes open to the experiences of Muslim communities here. So I do have a PowerPoint slide I'm just going to share with you here. Really what I'm sharing with you on these slides are the words of the people that I've worked with, words of the Muslim communities that I've worked with across the country in 2 studies on anti-Muslim hate crime, a pilot study in Ontario and Quebec a few years ago, and more recently a broader national study. So just really, I guess this is really setting the context, right? Sort of a global national look at what we're seeing in terms of the experiences of Muslim individuals and communities across the country. But I want to situate it first with the official data from law enforcement, so police reported hate crimes, and just to look at the pattern that we've seen from 2009 to 2019, so the last decade or so. Fairly flat in the early years up until about 2016, right? Not a lot of variation year to year. Some of that can be accounted for by better reporting or, more willingness on the part of communities to report their victimization. But then we see this really dramatic increase in 2017, 47% increase in hate crimes targeting the Muslim community during that period. Hate crimes generally during that period of time. And in fact, that spike, and remember what happened in 2016, right? That was the Trump election, and so many narratives that really vilified a whole array of communities, including Muslims. And so during that, within that spike, the increase in hate crime targeting Muslim communities was actually 151%. So a really dramatic increase specific there. We see a bit of a decrease and then back up again. We've just seen the preliminary data, not the full report, but just some sketchy data on 2020. And we're seeing from 2019 to 2020 a further 37% increase in hate crimes. So bringing it up to unprecedented high levels of hate crime generally. And again, part of that associated with anti-Muslim violence. So again, you can see in a different way here, just looking at hate crimes motivated by religion. And these are fairly consistent trends over time. Anti-Semitic violence tends to be most common, followed by anti-Muslim, Catholic, and other as well. But again, you see that dramatic spike I was referring to in 2017 that increased the risk to the Muslim community. And I think it's important to also, when we're thinking about, Muslims being targeted, it's also important, I think, to look at race and ethnicity, because in the police data, they're only recording one or the other, either race or religion, not, multiple motivations. So I think there's, probably some elision there in terms of some South Asian violence might also be, might be racially motivated as well as motivated by perceived religion. And I think the same with Arab and West Asian. So I think if we add those, the numbers might even be higher than what we see just looking at religion alone. So in the study, so what I want to talk about primarily today is really the impacts of anti-Muslim hate crime on the individuals and communities that we're speaking about here today. So just an overview of the nature of violence that we saw. So this one, this person is saying, a lot of it is really at the lower level. And if we look at the hate crime data, the official data, that's borne out there as well. So, people walking on the street or in the mall, as this one says, waiting in a bus stop, people might just yell at you and throw something at you from a moving car. They might just smash into you while you're walking. So it's less like I'm going to kill you. It's more somebody who does something pretty minor. And that was, the experience of a lot of people. And I think that is what the issue is. I mean, we tend to minimize and trivialize and downplay, these sort of minor or petty incidents, people shoving you, people, verbally harassing you. But because it happens so frequently, it really has a long-term traumatic and cumulative effect on individuals and communities. And that's certainly something that I've seen in the Muslim community. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So a lot of it is at the lower end, but we can't deny the impact of that. So again, just looking at some of the things that people have experienced, and this is quite common, right? You are a terrorist, or are you Arab? Are you Muslim? Well, then you're terrorist. So we hear that language an awful lot in the work that we do and the interviews that we do with Muslim communities, and it escalates. I was choked and physically assaulted and threatened because they declared they were Muslim. Someone threw a bottle of urine from a car window. So here was another one, the threats to mosques, and we hear about it at community centers as well. I remember the mosque I was going to, we had Friday night classes with youths, and we got several threats that the teachers were brainwashing the students. So we started to get like bomb threats, and then people would stand outside and have guns, just crazy, obscene things. And the next one talks about, in fact, not just the threats, but also arson attempts at their mosques as well. So again, that escalation from the verbal to the physical, and now pretty serious crimes all the way up to arson. I think it's important to note also the gendered nature of a great deal of anti-Muslim violence. In most communities, men are more likely to be targeted than are women. That is not the case in the Muslim community. It's far more likely for women to be targeted, and especially women who are visibly Muslim because they're covered in some way. And so this is something that people recognize. My experience has been that the majority of anti-Muslim sentiment is generally directed towards women because they're much more identifiable. At least women who are visibly observant as Muslims, and whether they wear hijab or not, and whatnot, and how they're manifesting their observance. And so, the women, again, because of their visibility, are much more likely to be targeted. So this one says some women were, I guess, when you hear about stories, some women were yelled at sexually derogatory things in association with their religion, and people just yelled, drove by and yelled. So there's that sort of, again, ongoing and fairly regular experience that people may have. Do Muslims report their victimization? Not often. The general social science data that just came out for 2019 that was released under access to information request actually found that only about 22% of all incidents of hate crime are reported to police. That certainly is borne out in the interviews that I do, that people are very unlikely to report their victimization. So as this one says, there's a lot of distrust because if you get assaulted and report it to police, nothing happens. That makes us not trust institutions. We know they're not necessarily on our side. They're not going to help us. And so again, this one suggests that the second one also suggests that there's no sense reporting to police, nothing happens, there's no response, there's a very cursory investigation. This one says they didn't catch anyone. It's great that people know that you can report, but I haven't seen much in terms of being able to find the evidence to prosecute these people for hate crime against the Muslim community. It's very disheartening. It makes me question the ability of the criminal justice system to address issues like that. So there is a hesitancy to report. And that's sort of the sense of being under police. That is that Muslims aren't protected by law enforcement, that law enforcement don't take them seriously. Yet the other side of that, half of the equation, is that they also feel like, and this contributes to that distrust, that they are over policed, that Muslims are in fact targeted by law enforcement, whether it's local, federal, or federal. The police are particularly targeting the Muslim community. My brother was living around Jane Street, and so he used to be involved with the mosque, and because he's outspoken, he gets the attention. So a different kind of visibility that draws the attention of law enforcement, not of hate crime perpetrators necessarily. Another one says, I've noticed a lot of Islamophobia among the RCMP. There was an officer who came to our house looking for a Muslim man. They came to our house because we were Muslim and thought we would know him. It's sort of like when I'm outside of Canada, people say, oh, you're from Canada, do you know, right? The whole community knows one another. CSIS have also done this same thing to us. So I know from personal experience, there's a lot of prejudice against Muslims and people of color in the RCMP. So again, feeds into that distrust, that unwillingness to respond, to report hate crime. So what are the consequences of that anti-Muslim violence, the anti-Muslim hate crime? And we noticed a number of different emotional as well as behavioral effects of the risk and the experience of hate crime. Because again, remember, many of these people don't necessarily themselves experience hate crime directly, but are very much aware of the risk in their community. So it affects them as part of the community. So fear, and again, that's what the hate crime perpetrator intends, is to instill fear, to terrorize the community, to silence them, if possible, through that fear. So if you're being harassed, forces me to be very cautious of where I'm going. I feel uncomfortable as I'm walking through the community. There's always a fear. There's reason I shave my beard more often these days. And there was laughter there. I mean, there's always a fear, and it's very, very real fear. When I go to mosque to pray on Fridays, there's a fear some guy's going to come out with a gun because it happened in Quebec, happened in New Zealand. It can happen here. The women in particular, fearful, don't want to venture out on their own, change their daily lives because of fear of some of the hate crimes and hate speech that was occurring. So very widespread within the community. Another factor, and this is as disturbing as the fear, is this normalization, the sense that this is a normal part of the experience day to day on a regular basis for so many people, if not in sort of reality, the expectation or that fear is itself a daily reality, never knowing when it's going to happen to you. I think my community is so used to it that they know how to filter it out. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I think when you go through it time and time again, you begin to ignore it and just go on with your day. It's just the way life is. It's something I know a lot of people face on a regular basis, and it seems to be pretty common for people in our community. And this is really disturbing. I didn't think it was anything that stood out or was worth publicizing. It's become so routine, so common, it's not worth commenting, it's not worth remarking, and ultimately reporting as well. Paranoia goes with that fear, right? That fear, that need to be always looking around, being aware of your surroundings, of who is in the area, where you are, being very careful in that respect. So becoming very hyper vigilant of your surrounding. So this one says, I was so anxious at the church and kept asking myself, am I safe here? What do I do if a shooter comes here? How would I get out of here? How would my dad get out of here? Now I'm more on the lookout, conscious, prepared. So again, that hyper vigilance, especially since the Quebec mosque shootings and what's been going on in the States, I've become increasingly vigilant because of what's going on around me. I have become a lot more afraid that when that incident happened, it was just kind of an added thing. So, in the day to day, it feels like something that could happen all the time. When we have these really really intense incidents, with murders and highly publicized incidents, that exacerbates the problem as well. So other emotional impacts. I mean, it's exhausting, right? It bears down. It's wearing on an individual when you feel like you're hated. We've been beaten down and beaten down and beaten down. So again, that cumulative effect on individuals and on the community, as this one says, it's exhausting. It's oppressive. It wears people out. It wears them down. It wears them out. And this one is very worried about the impact on the children, and have noticed that the problem in the school, kids get depressed, and they are, I think some come out of this shock and some never come out of it. And a number of people have talked about their fear or their concerns for their own children and other children as well, who maybe don't have the same capacity to cope with or understand or make sense of the Islamophobia around them, even when they're targeted themselves. And so the impact on children, I think, is something that we don't talk about enough. And I think it's something that that many people in the community are very concerned about, in terms of depression and fear and anxiety, and the way that can then disrupt their performance in the schools. So again, I think something we need to pay attention to. No surprise, many people talked about hate crime as being divisive. within the broader society. It creates more barriers, more separation between us and them. It reinforces, what many people have felt for some time. Again, that us versus them. So this person says they feel more isolated and more of an outsider, and that may contribute to more resentment towards white people because we feel attacked. So that almost cycle of hostility or distrust between communities creates separation, hatred, rivalry. As many want to seek revenge, then it'll never stop. Again, that cyclical nature, and less trust between communities as well. And in some respects, again, this is the intent of the perpetrator, to create or reinforce that us versus them, to reinforce the message that there is a particular place for Muslims, and hate crime is meant to remind them of that. So we talked about, I've really been talking about the emotional impacts and the fear and the anxiety and what have you. But we also see that there are often behavioral consequences of hate crime as well. So people talk about managing or even changing their identities, the way that they present themselves to people around them, the way that they live and move in the world around them. So women deciding whether or not to remain covered. People talk about men, shortening or shaving their beards, whatever it takes to be less visible, as this one says, probably praying outside less. I know that that's something I've done, and I suspect a lot of people as well. I used to pray anywhere, like in the mall. And again, that fear, has convinced her that perhaps it's not safe to do that. So again, changing the way she moves about in the world, and the way that she expresses her identity as well. And this one, and on the other side, a man talking about trimming his beard, but his parents were afraid that he might then become targeted, and this was one way to protect himself or defend himself from that potential. So this one was really interesting. So this one talks about, when I'm in my community, when I'm within the Muslim community, whether it's at a community center or a mosque, I dress the way I want. But I wear hijab, I feel good. But as soon as I drive home and we stop at, let's say, a Freshco, I have to take off my hijab. Like, why do I have to take that off? I kind of make myself more appealing or comfortable for them so that they don't feel threatened by me. Again, not just changing the day-to-day, in the midst of the daily routine, changing the presentation of self. This one I think is really interesting. This is one that I love to use. I've never really worn the hijab before, but for a short period of time, right after 9/11, I started wearing it as like a sign of defiance, And I also knew that because it wasn't my style and I wasn't going to keep it on for too long, it was definitely a time when I felt felt like being more visibly Muslim. It was necessary for me to deal with all the anti-Muslim sentiments and hate that was going on around me, around like in my school. I just wanted to feel defiance. And I thought that this was really a powerful statement that in fact, it takes me back to that movie Network, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And this is sort of the point to which this young woman had come at that point in time, that she was going to stand up and reclaim her identity and proclaim her identity to everyone and show that she wasn't going to be intimidated. And I thought that was a really powerful, really strong statement as well. I mentioned divisiveness, and this is sort of related to that notion of divisiveness, that sense of a lack of belonging, makes you feel like you're an outsider. So people talk about being, constantly reminded, and this is what hate crime does again, right? It reminds you that you are not valued, you're not wanted, you're not part of the community. In this case, you're not part of the Canadian community. And so many people talked about this as one of the consequences, one of the impacts of hate crime, as really disrupting that sense of being allowed to be Canadian or express themselves as Canadian, for example. I never feel like I'm Canadian because of the snide comments, the dirty looks. It's a constant affirmation that no matter what you do, there will always be prejudice against you. There's a feeling of not belonging over here. This is still a country for white people. Your faith is not seen as something that's valuable or positive. And I think for Muslims who were newcomers in particular, that was something they struggled with, right? They had come to Canada because of the recognition, right? That global reputation that we have for being, so welcoming and so respectful and inclusive. And yet these are the experiences that people are having or people around them are having. And it's a real jolt to that image that they hold of Canada, and a real jolt to the expectations that they had of what their life would be when they came here. On the upside, and I referred to the young woman who said, okay, I'm going to put on my hijab. I'm going to be, represent myself as visibly Muslim, just as a way of saying I'm proud to be Muslim and I'm not going to be intimidated. And we did see a considerable amount of that. That is, people becoming very much engaged, becoming more mobilized by the patterns of Islamophobia that they see around them, whether it's hate crime or other forms of Islamophobia. And because they, as this one suggested, in some respects, it made them feel powerless. They wanted to reclaim some power by getting involved in the community, by organizing neighborhood watches here, or helping to create open houses and opportunities for people to come together. So it can have, again, from a perpetrator's perspective, unintended consequences of actually enhancing community solidarity and enhancing and reinvigorating the sense of community that people may have. It makes people want to stick to going from their jobs to just going home and being isolated because of fear. On the other hand, some Muslims have a radically different reaction, which is to want to go out in the community and be active to change that and improve on the situation. And this is the kind of energy, I think, that we really want to exploit and to mobilize and to create through conversations, I think, like we're having tonight. And this is one of those opportunities, right, for Muslim people and allies to be those agents of change, to begin the conversations within the community, to keep us on, to take us down a different route. And so that's it for me. I will stop sharing now, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists and engaging in some give and take at the end. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Barb, for sharing your presentation with us and for sharing your research findings. It's just so valuable. For our second presentation, I welcome Badar Javaid, Vice President of the Pickering Islamic Center, which serves the Muslim community from Pickering and Ajax. Badar has been a resident of Pickering with his wife and 3 children for over 35 years and has strong roots in Pickering and Ajax. He's also a business owner, and his businesses are located locally in Ajax and Pickering. Badar joined the board of the Pickering Islamic Center as vice president just over 4 years ago, and he's been a volunteer at the center for the past 20 years. We are lucky to have him with us this evening, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Badar to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Barbara, for actually very enlightening talk. What you talk about, just my perspective on that, is that some of it actually I can relate to myself. Going back, coming to Canada as an immigrant with my parents in the mid-70s. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but I just want to talk about how that sort of kind of fostered my image of how I perceive myself, how I see myself as a Canadian. And I basically told myself that if I ever get into a situation where I had an ability to actually contribute, that I would want to do that, and also make it easier for not just new Muslims, but Muslims that have kids of a young age. Because when I came to Canada, I was 9 years old. And so my big focus today is really about the youth and about seniors. Both are who actually are vulnerable in our society, and both are challenged in a lot of the ways, because both don't have the kind of understanding that, when you kind of grow up here and you've gone through the educational system, you gain that understanding, you gain that insight, and they don't have that. So having said that, I had an opportunity to get involved with the Pickering Islamic Center actually it predates me a little bit. In 1997, we acquired a small house in Pickering on Brock Road. And the vision was to create a mosque. And initially the vision was the mosque. And to kind of create an environment where Muslims from, from the surrounding area can come and pray. And here is the actual picture of the initial house that we purchased, and a small house where we gathered for prayers, because there was no mosque in Pickering predating 1997. We would pray at each other's homes, basically. And I remember growing as a youth, that's what we ended up doing. So this was a welcome sight to see, basically, that we actually have a house. And from there, we actually did a local drive for fundraising to actually build a proper mosque. We didn't have any funding from any external sources. It was all the funds that was gathered to raise the building to build the mosque actually came from local people, local Muslims within the area. So alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, we kind of laid the foundation after about a 10 or 12 years of raising funds to actually start the construction of the mosque. And I think you'll see the construction happening here. We acquired about 2 acres of land, and on one of the acres, we actually built that proper mosque. And now the vision here was not just a mosque, but a place of gathering for not just for Friday prayers and the 5 daily prayers, but also to really to educate our youth and to actually have them get involved with our culture, our religion, and to participate, so that there was a support mechanism in place for them. So this was a massive project. So it took a number of years to actually build, but alhamdulillah got completed. And in 2008, we actually opened the mosque, and as a finished project that you see today. It is one of the kind of landmarks in Pickering. It actually is a landmark as you come in from northeast Pickering into the city. It's actually it's a landmark that you see, and it actually has quite a bit of prominence and gained quite a bit of reputation and recognition over the years from the City Council of Pickering and appreciation. So it serves as a focal point for our community. Our community has grown over the past 2 decades in Pickering. The demographics have changed in Pickering. As a business owner in Pickering, Ajax, I saw that change firsthand in terms of people moving into the area. And now they actually could come and pray, basically congregate and be part of that, have that landmark, be part of that community. Now, this is a full service facility. That was one of the vision that we actually had, that we wanted to, not just a place of worship or prayer, but also a place where, we could have funeral services. We could have weddings. So we have a little banquet hall underneath in the basement. We have, a program where seniors can gather on a regular basis. So a lot of the community moved into the area just because of facilitation of the mosque, especially for seniors, just because they're so heavily linked to the mosque. Now, one of the things we actually is still lacking with the mosque is a gymnasium, like almost a community center. So the next phase of the mosque is actually to build a gymnasium and a proper community center adjacent to the mosque. Now, we do have a school there where we are younger, up to grade 7, that we can educate our kids. And then they have an easier time to assimilate into the higher grades and going into junior high or high school. Now, I got involved with the mosque about 20 odd years ago as a volunteer, and just because I thought there was a need, and I wanted to be able to relate to our community, be a support mechanism, be part of that community, and then also reach out. One of the things that we wanted to really initiate was a interfaith dialogue. So we do have a program in place where we actually invite high school kids from different parts of Durham. They come especially the kids who are taking religious classes or introduction to Islam. They'll come and they'll get to meet our imam that will give them a tour. Imam is our spiritual leader. You give them a tour of the mosque and also have a question answer, questions that are on the tip of their minds, and we try to answer their questions. And believe it or not, you know what? There's so many questions that come up and they get answered, and a lot of the times our imam tells us that the kids leave with a completely different feeling of what Islam is, and you know, how it's projected in the media, and you know, how we could sort of create a better understanding for them. And they go back and they become our ambassadors when they go back to their high schools, and they become our ambassadors that, hey, you know, we visited the mosque, this is what they do. Because from the outside, it seemed like a structure and some sort of, you don't know what's going on inside, you don't know about the prayer hall, you don't know what's going on. So there's a little bit of a mystique about it, or you don't know, you know, you want to find out what is actually really happening in there. One of the challenges we've always had is that, you know, as a Muslim, you know, when you go to that, you know, you go to church, you know what's going on in church because you see it on the media, but what do people actually do in a mosque? And, you know, on Fridays when we actually have our sermons and gatherings, basically, you know, the idea is there to show them we preach the same thing that, you know, the Christians preach about unity, harmony, love, neighbor, all those type of things, basically, in the worship of God, basically, right? So that was part of the objective, is to create that kind of that dialogue. We also have a working group, interfaith working group, that reaches out to other you know, mosques, churches and synagogues, to you know, other denominations, so that we can have a kind of a unity in terms of a united voice when we have situations such as you know, the Quebec City shootings, killings, and also in New Zealand, so that we come together. So we actually taken steps to form vigils and to create that dialogue. The other part of it, what we do is actually we have a youth committee at the mosque, and they're involved with also. These are some of the services on the slide that we actually offer at the mosque, from, you know, from religious ceremonies to committees. Youth committee, basically, we had a program just very recently. It says walk the walk, talk the talk. It was a youth discussion, a group discussion on hate, Islamophobia, how to deal with it, how to project yourself in a more positive image, how to, you know. And then we also have counseling services at the mosque as well for youth, or anyone that, for that matter, that is a victim of crime, of hate. And you know, they don't know where to turn, especially the young youth that are sometimes they are, I don't know if they can't be expressive at home to their parents, but they might be going through some anxiety issues. We try to deal with that at the mosque. So it's become a more of a kind of a place where they can hang out and you know, interact and get some help. One of the things that was important to us was to, again, to have a kind of a projection of what we are, what we do. So every December, we actually have a holiday lunch, and we invite members of the community. These are spiritual leaders from other faith groups, as well as you know, frontline workers, politicians, from all walks of life, business people. They come in, they actually sit down with us. We have discussion lively on different topics. We have lunch, discuss, you know, commonalities. Basically, a lot more commonalities than there are differences. So, you know, those things and how we can sort of interact, those things, we do that on a regular basis, but especially during the holiday season. So that's one of the things that we do. Other thing is we started a carnival back about 13 years ago. Now we haven't had it over the last couple of years because of the pandemic. But my wife and I, we thought about, you know, what can we do that we could actually showcase not just the mosque, but get people into the parking lot of the mosque, where we can actually get people and to bring their kids within the community, so they can see give them a tour of the mosque, but all at the same time have fun, have, you know, taste some food, you know, interact. So we came up with the idea of a community carnival. So it's an inclusive carnival. Everyone's welcome. And this has been a great success where we get to sample some foods from different parts of the world. And at the same time, they get a chance to interact, and we give them tours of the mosque and what we do at the mosque, some of the facilities that we provide. So that was that. And one of the other things that we've done as part of our executive that we thought, you know what, we need to be able to give back, relate to the community. And one of the things that we came up with was, is that, you know, we felt that, you know, in the wintertime, especially, you have a lot of seniors who are shut in. They don't get a chance to go out. They might have some mobility issues. They may have some financial issues. And especially over the last couple of years where, you know, it becomes even more difficult. So we came up with the idea of grocery hampers, where we would actually support, and we have supported about 800 families throughout Pickering Ajax, where we would prepare hampers for them, you know, over this winter. We did it last year. These would include hygiene kits, you know, basic needs such as vegetable oil, you know, margarine, beans, all those sort of stuff that you would need on a regular basis. And then we actually would give out and give them out. We'd have volunteers and deliver them personally, and say, you know what, we're here from the Pickering Islamic Center. If you have any needs, please reach out to us. Now they were recruited in terms of how would we target them is. We would ask our congregation, or, you know, do you know of anyone that might be of need, and direct them to visit our website, get registered, and we would actually follow up from there and through kind of outreach program. Again, was there to help and to create a dialogue. And actually, I did it myself personally, where I was involved, and I delivered some of these hampers myself. So, you know, I firsthand saw the gratitude. That you know, that we, you know, and the smiles we brought to their faces, and, you know, introduced myself that, hey, you know, I'm a volunteer from the local mosque, and we're here to do this. And, you know, they were surprised, and they were delighted. So, you know, that was, again, things giving back. You know, we would have be involved with the lunch with in some soup. We're actually in the process of actually developing a soup kitchen. Hopefully, if that works out, then we can actually invite people come in for a cup of soup and get involved there. Involved with the community at large in terms of fundraising for Ajax Pickering Hospital. Again, this was all initiative that we came up with. There was really 3 pillars here: interact, relate, understand, and we're trying to sort of kind of be inclusive as part of the community. So we know that there's a lot of negative propaganda. There's a lot of negativity, but our sermons are centered around that. In order to be a good Muslim, you have to be a good neighbor, and we're trying to overcome that that stereotype by having human interaction and human contact. So these are some of the, I mean, some of the programs we have. There's a lot more that we actually are engaged with, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we are doing at the mosque, and we will continue to do so. So, and I'd be happy to answer some questions, and I'd be happy to relate my own personal experience if the time permits, in terms of what my experience coming to Canada and facing some of these challenges that we've had in the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Badar, for sharing with us some of the amazing initiatives that the Pickering Islamic Center does. It's really great to know what our local community is doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that if you have any questions for our speakers, to please put it in the Q&A features, and we will get to that at the end of the presentation. So for our third panelist, I welcome Kubra Mir, President of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women in Durham Region. She is also a board member for Islamic History Month Canada and manages group blood donation in the local Muslim community for Canada Blood Services. Kubra won the Good Deed Award for her volunteer work with the town of Ajax in 2017 and received an award from the Pakistani Association Friends in Deed in 2017. She has volunteered for over 5 years at the Soup Kitchen at Islamic Foundation and helped to run a seniors group at the Pickering Islamic Center. We are very fortunate to have her with us, so without further ado, I welcome Kubra to begin her presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kubra, and I would just like to thank Ajax Public Library for this opportunity to speak on this really important topic. I would like to acknowledge the land that we are gathered on as a traditional territory of the Abenaki Mississauga, adjacent to the Mississauga of Shuag Island First Nation and the land covered by the Williams Treaty. I think it's important as Muslims to acknowledge the people before us. I'm a volunteer for Canadian Council of Muslim Women. It's the acronym is CCMW. It's a 39-year-old nonprofit organization that was recently given charitable status. CCMW is committed to improving the status of women, empower, and they are, try to motivate women and to learn about their Islamic history and about their Canadian identity. So today I want to talk briefly about the history of Muslims in Canada and share my own experience as a woman who has faced racism and Islamophobia. Okay, we're going to start off with the history of Muslims in Canada. So from the beginning, we believe that there were Black Muslims that came to Canada through the slave trade, but it was not documented. So the very first Muslims recorded was in 1851. This is their slide, James and Agnes Love. They came to Canada in 1851 from Scotland. They had a son named James in 1854, who was the very first Muslim to be born in Canada. Okay, and then next slide, please. So according to the records, there were 4 Muslims living in Canada in 1854. Canada was founded in 1867, and by 1871, the number of Muslims increased to 13. The early Muslims came from Greater Syria, which now includes Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and Jordan. They also came from Turkey, which was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. So the majority of these people moved to Alberta and Western Canada because the land was cheap and labor was needed. Some worked on building the railway and others searched for gold. Many of these early Muslim immigrants worked as peddlers. This is the picture that is one of them, and they opened general stores. Many of these early Muslims worked for the fur traders, right? And they even learned to speak indigenous languages, right? And unfortunately, a lot of these early Muslims had their names changed to English names by immigration officials who did not want to make the effort to record different names. Next slide, please. So the very first Muslim politician, so his name was Bedouin Farah. He left his home in Lebanon and came to Canada in 1910. He later changed his name to Peter Baker. That's his own personal choice. Peter became a successful fur trader despite facing a lot of discrimination and opposition from the huge company, which was the Hudson Bay Company. Peter entered politics after he stopped working in the fur trade and was elected member of the Legislative Assembly in the Northwest Territories for the period of 1964 and 1967. Next slide, please. So after World War II, there was an increase in the Muslim population in Canada. And those who immigrated to Canada were skilled and laborers and professionals. In 1901, there were 47 Muslims, and in 1921, there was a whole 478. So there's a huge increase. In 1931, there were 700 Muslims living in Canada, and many were from Syria and Lebanon. The picture of this lady here, her name is Hilwi Hamden. She came to Saskatchewan in 1922 as a teenage bride with her husband, Ali, who was a fur trader. And what she did was in the 1930s, she spoke to the local mayor, John Fry of Edmonton, to donate land. Then afterwards, what she did was she contacted and she persuaded Muslims across Alberta and Saskatchewan to donate money for the mosque. She raised $5,000, and the first mosque of Canada, the Al Rashid Mosque, was opened in 1938. Next slide, please. So this is the founder of the organization I volunteer. Lai is an incredible person, and she has had so many firsts in her life. She was the first woman in Canada to obtain a PhD in educational psychology. She was the first Muslim woman in Canada to serve on a public school board. She was also the first Muslim woman in North America, which is pretty incredible, to serve as a university chaplain. And in 2001, she became the first Muslim woman to be awarded the Order of Canada. So in her honor, CCMW it organizes every year an annual scholarship to encourage other Muslim women to study and strive for excellence and hopefully follow her footsteps. So in 1960, Canada adopted a new immigration policy based on point system, where individuals applying for the immigration were graded according to their educational level. So immigration from South Asia started at this time. And in this time period, my husband's maternal uncle, Dr. Syed Rahman, his wife, Dr. Afzal Rahman, along with his sister, Malik Syed, and her husband, Amjad Syed, immigrated from India and became very active in the Muslim community. I just wanted to share this as context. And then next slide, please. Okay, so in 1961, Dr. Murray Hoban, who's pictured here, and his wife, Alia, she's also a retired director of CCMW, along with my husband's maternal family, who I just mentioned earlier, worked with the Albanian community to establish the first mosque in Toronto. Dr. Murray has published this book. It was just recently published, and he wrote about some interviews he's held in this book. And also my husband's uncle, he's also in a chapter in that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is one of my favorite pictures. Okay, so this is a picture that I've seen in my husband's side for years. And on the right, wearing the bow tie, very handsome guy, is Dr. Syed Rahman. He's my husband's maternal uncle. And on the left is Dr. Murray. In the book, Dr. Murray wrote that Malcolm X had gone for Hajj, the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, and had visited Toronto in 1964. He was invited to speak at the first Toronto mosque and was presented with an Islamic calligraphy print that he's seen holding in this photograph. Unfortunately, there are no videos or audio of this visit, and tragically, Malcolm X was assassinated shortly afterwards. This is just one of the interesting stories in this book. Next slide, please. Okay, so on a more personal note, my father came in 1969, and he was a tool and die maker. He came from India, and within 2 days of landing in Canada, he had several job offers. The economy was different then, and he decided to accept a job in Cambridge, Ontario. Shortly after, my mom, she came, she brought my 9-month-old sister, she's pictured here, and I was 2. My parents had to learn to navigate a new culture and deal with Canadian winters. I think that was a big thing for them. My father was educated in a convent school, and he had a really good English speaking skills, but my mom really struggled. We lived in a community. There were people of very few of different colors. On our street, there was a Sikh family, a Black family, and us. In the 1970s, there was a huge backlash against the growing Muslim population, and we would often hear, "Go home, Paki." I would come home crying after being up by local bullies, and my mom, as she walked down the street, she would be mocked. She had long braided hair, as you could see in this photograph. My father went back to school in the 1980s, and he became a high school teacher. He struggled. He faced a lot of racism when he tried applying for jobs, and he also had a Muslim name, which probably didn't get him any interviews. But he did manage to, become a high school teacher, and he retired in the Ottawa Valley. And I just like to share that I've experienced racism in small towns growing up in Ontario all my life. I was 6 years old, and I remember this story very clearly. Is I had gone with a friend, we were playing, we came back to her house, she wanted to go to the washroom. Anyways, the screen door was open, and then I could hear them talking, and they just said, so her mom said to her, she says, "Why are you playing with that brown girl? She's so dirty. Why are you playing with her?" And then afterwards, after she got scolded, this girl stopped playing with me. And I think that was an incident that affected me my whole life. And it made me realize that children, they're innocent, they're born innocent, and that hatred is taught. So this is something that is, as I said, a significant impact on my life. So when I moved to Toronto, after I got married, I went to see an apartment what I had done is I phoned and I said, hey, do you have a place available? So I called and they said, yeah, come over. I get there. And then immediately they said, no, we don't have anything. And then I thought, that's kind of weird. Why would you tell me to come and then tell me it's not there? So then afterwards, what I did was I went back. We didn't have cell phones in those days. I'm really dating myself here. And then what I did was I called on a phone from a phone booth and I said, do you have any vacancies? And they said, yes. So obviously this was very blatant and it was a real slap to my face because, obviously they must have seen my face on the camera. They saw that I was brown. They saw that they didn't want my type brown people living there. So I wasn't welcome. So while these little incidents are very minute, very small, they have had an impact on my life and it's affected my self-esteem. When I was bullied, when I was told I wasn't good enough, that, I should go home, all these things are hateful words. And I think they've affected me my whole life. And actually, a lot of the work I do today is to change these points of view. Okay. So moving forward, currently Muslims make about 2.8% of the country's population. And by 2030, there'll be about 2.7 million Muslims living in Canada. And they'll make up approximately 6.6% of the population. So with this increase of population, there's also an increase of hatred. Barbara spoke about it. We all know about 9/11. We saw how much violence and how much hatred that created. Again, 2 more incidents. The Quebec shooting 2017, 6 people were praying in a mosque. They were shot. And unfortunately, just recently last summer, we had a terrorist attack in London, Ontario. A family just innocently walking down the street. It could have been me because I walked the house without my ID and they were killed. And their 9-year-old son was injured and he's also orphaned, sadly, right? And now in our world, in Quebec, Muslims, women are in positions of authority, such as judges, teachers, are barred from wearing religious symbols. This is a very scary law that they have there. And they're treated like second-class citizens. In Alberta, Black women continue to be targets of Islamophobic attacks, and they've been, have experienced violence in Calgary and Edmonton since December 2020. So the Muslim media, they have a lot to do with how Muslims are portrayed. They like to show Muslim women as being weak, oppressed, victims by their religion and by the men in their community. And this is referred to as gendered Islamophobia. Next slide, please. Okay, and the most frequent victims of Islamophobic hate crimes in Canada are women and Muslim women, right? And what I believe is that women should have a choice on what they wear. And that most Muslim women, despite this little controversy, they decide to wear the hijab out of their own free will, or the niqab. The niqab is the veil that's over their face, out of their own personal choice. So the people I know and that I'm familiar with wear it out of their personal choice. And I think that's a great freedom and something that the Canadian Charter of Rights talks about as well. And from my personal experience, not that I wear the hijab on a regular basis, but when I have worn it to the mosque or to attend a community gathering, I see that people treat you slightly more different. And I've had a situation where I was wearing the hijab, a person came up and said, your English is pretty good. And I thought, okay, that's interesting, and another person, when I wear the mosque, I know I sometimes just wear it and just wander around. I went shopping and then I've had people follow me around. Maybe they thought I was I don't know what they're thinking, but anyways, it just makes you start wondering, why do people think that just by wearing a piece of cloth, that it makes other people uncomfortable? Okay. And last slide, please. Second last slide. So in conclusion, CCMW is working on educating the community, and we recently launched the Digital Anti-Racism Education 2. It's designed to start the conversation about racism and train communities across Canada, equipping them with effective tools and resources to counter Islamophobia and cyber hate. And hopefully, inshallah, our chapter will be holding one of these workshops as well. And my last slide, please. So I just want to end this, talk on a positive note. So I really believe we can rise and overcome racist and Islamophobic violence. So I really would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I hope we can all work together for a better future.
Thank you so much, Kubra, for teaching us about the Muslim history in Canada and also for sharing about your own experience. Just a reminder that if you have any questions, to please put them in the Q&A. And I am so pleased to present our fourth speaker tonight, Rizwan Mohammed, Advocacy Officer for the National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM. Rizwan graduated from the University of Toronto, specializing in Islamic studies. Prior to joining NCCM, he conducted research on Islamic thought and Muslim life, educated leaders of Muslim students' associations, and served a diverse array of Muslim-led community organizations across Canada. For over 10 years, Rizwan managed national civic engagement projects, mobilizing youth and community leaders to engage in active citizenship. These projects centered on service learning activities designed to strengthen civil society. As NCCM's advocacy officer, Rizwan advocates for advancements in public policy nationally to oppose Islamophobia and promote justice for all Canadians. We are very lucky to have him with us, so I am going to turn it over to Rizwan to begin his presentation.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Julia, maybe you can confirm.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm loud and clear. Okay, and I hope everybody can see my presentation. Thank you so much to the Ajax Library and Julia and Sarah and Larry and everybody working there that's made this possible. And thank you to my panelists. I loved all of your presentations, and I agree with the points that you've made, and a lot of what you said resonates strongly with me. The title of my slightly odd presentation is, well, hopefully the presentation isn't odd, but my title might strike you as odd: Hate Ship, Love Ship, Recommendations to to Oppose Islamophobia. I take this title from a movie from 2014 directed by Liza Johnson, starring Kristen Wiig, which was called Hate Ship, Love Ship. And the movie was based on a 2001 short story by Alice Munro entitled Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, Marriage. For people that might not know Alice Munro, she was born in 1931. She's a Canadian short story writer who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2013. And while Munro's story is not explicitly about racism or hate exactly, it does explore how we can misunderstand, oppose, and hurt one another, and how we can change. And to oppose racism, hate, and Islamophobia, what we can see, I think, is that we need to learn how to change as individuals, to change as a society. How do we do that? Here's some ways that the NCCM is working for change. I should say a few words about the NCCM. We were founded in July 2000, so we're about 21 years old, still a young organization. We are independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we work to protect Canadian human rights and civil liberties, challenge discrimination and Islamophobia, build mutual understanding, and advocate for the public concerns of Canadian Muslims. We work in the courts, we engage the media, we organize communities. Our education department works with youth, teachers, school boards, and other organizations to deliver diversity, equity, and inclusion programming services. Our government relations department engages federal, provincial, and municipal governments to advance public policy nationally in service of the goal to eradicate Islamophobia and to promote justice for all Canadians. We recognize that the NCCM's work takes place on the traditional territories and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples occupied by Canada. We really appreciate Julia's statement on behalf of the library at the beginning, acknowledging the land, but going further. And we were honored to participate in observing Canada's first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, where all of our staff actually took some time out to observe the holiday, but also to review the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action. I actually ended up having some time with a local mosque imam and a local Muslim journalist, where we sort of went over some of the calls to action and thought about what we're practically doing to advance some of those calls just as community members and as Canadians. We recognize that the experiences and the contributions that First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make in strengthening our communities, provinces, and country as a whole are things that we have to pay close attention to and celebrate and work harder on. As we work at the NCCM to challenge the discrimination Canadian Muslims face, we recognize that our work is interconnected with Indigenous struggles past and present. You can see here a screenshot of our team page. If you go to nccm.ca and visit our team page, you'll see a lot of staff working across the country. You can see here our Chief Executive Officer and our Chief Operating Officer, and our Director of Legal Affairs as well, Samia Omar, who's often in court. And by clicking on people's profiles, you can learn a bit more about what they're working on, and you can also contact them with the contact information that's available there. I just want to talk briefly about some of the things that we're doing after the London attack on the Muslim family that shocked the country. We joined other civil society organizations, Muslim and non-Muslim, calling for a national summit, a national action summit on Islamophobia. And we were pleased that the federal government convened that summit in the summer. We were one of many voices, including the Canadian Council of Muslim Women and other community voices, national and regional, from coast to coast, that talked about what our recommendations for action were. In consultations with different organizations, the NCCM has sort of put together 61 calls for action. And we've sort of split them up into federal recommendations, provincial recommendations, and municipal recommendations. And we've further split up those recommendations by recommendations that are meant to address violent Islamophobia and recommendations that are meant to address systemic Islamophobia. I won't talk very much about our federal recommendations or our provincial recommendations, just in the interest of time. I want to make sure that people have time to ask questions or discuss some things that other panelists have also talked about, but I will focus on our municipal recommendations. I'll just give an example for a federal recommendation to address violent Islamophobia. We've seen online hate proliferate and grow more and more. Dr. Perry has done some amazing work on this as well, and other researchers have been working on this, including Dr. Irfan Chowdhury in Edmonton. So I recommend that people learn about that. But the federal government has committed to advancing new legislation to regulate online hate, and the NCCM is part of a consultation process that's happening with many different groups across the country and across different sectors to sort of guide that regulation so that it's well studied, that it's balanced, that it makes sense, and that it doesn't curtail free speech unnecessarily, or political action, especially action that's being taken to oppose anti-Black racism, to support Indigenous rights and other similar work. In our provincial recommendations, you can see one example of opposing violent Islamophobia is our work to call for hate crimes accountability units across all provinces. Hate crimes accountability units are being proposed as an idea to address the great disparity, and you could argue the growing disparity between the self-reporting of hate incidents that is happening all across the country, and the NCCM actually does intake on hate crime reporting and hate incident reporting, and we try to work with law enforcement in different jurisdictions to try to document what's happening and get some action. But usually, as Dr. Perry underlined for us earlier in this panel, there's a very high degree of underreporting that's happening, and a great disparity between that self-reporting and the police-reported hate crime statistics. So right now, one figure that we're looking at is that as little as 33% of Muslims experiencing hate-motivated incidents actually end up reporting to police. And there's many reasons for that, some of which Dr. Perry discussed. In terms of our municipal recommendations, I want to just highlight, because I'm very glad to see some of our town councillors listening and following along, and other representatives who are active in the community. thinking about this. Dr. Perry actually talked about some of the harassment that people experience on the street. We know this extends beyond hate-motivated harassment. For a long time, women have been experiencing sexual harassment in public spaces, and very little has been done about it. You know, we had some changes happen in the wake of the Me Too movement, and more successful feminist advocacy has been happening to change certain things systemically and in terms of violence against women or gender-based violence. And we're supportive of all of those things. I think one of the things that's missing from the bylaws that municipal governments currently have across Canada to address street-based harassment is the basis of race and religion. I'm just getting a note that my internet connection is unstable. I hope I haven't cut out for anybody. So just a quick note that the city of Edmonton recently, responsive to local community advocacy, as well as support from that was given by the National Council of Canadian Muslims advocating for it, the city of Edmonton passed an amendment to its bylaws to address street harassment on the basis of race and religion, but also, of course, on the basis of gender identity and other protected groups by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we're in conversations with the city of Toronto and the city of Hamilton and other cities across Canada, actually, on pursuing amendments to these bylaws. And if the town of Ajax is interested in sort of reviewing some of these things, we're very interested in having that conversation. We encourage community members that are listening in to think about how we can actually address address hate and racism in ways that are helpful and consider the safety of many different groups that are targeted. We saw from Dr. Perry's presentation that still to this day, after all of the work that Jewish Canadians have done to contribute to the civic life of our country, to contribute to arts and business and politics and athletics and everything that's happened with our Jewish community across Canada, they still experience the highest numbers of hate incidents and hate crimes. We also see hate crimes being directed at, well, anti-Black hate crimes, anti-Black racism that turns into violence, whether it's by civilians or by police. We know of the violence that's being experienced by Indigenous peoples on multiple levels. There was a story, I hate to sort of say a graphic example, but it's horrifying. It's always stayed with me, of an Indigenous person sleeping out and was sleeping out on a couch outside somewhere in the Maritimes. And some people came along and set fire to him. And things like that are, you know, they're covered in the news when they happen, and then we sort of like keep moving on. We've had work done on missing and murdered Indigenous women and some progress there, but not enough. So amending bylaws at the municipal level to sort of think about bullying and harassment and revisit some of what we are doing, rethinking some of it and taking some more concrete action is something I really encourage. One other thing I'll mention is just to acknowledge and applaud the work that the town of Ajax's Anti-Black Racism Task Force has been doing. Of course, they've been addressing anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism, violence, and in turn on systemic levels in Ajax. And I think members of the task force have also sort of expanded out and have sort of been addressing anti-Semitism. There was a great initiative to change street names that were celebrating people affiliated with the Nazi Party or the German military at the time of Nazi rule in World War II that had somehow gotten their names on streets. And that's been changed. That was done through the hard work of community members working in collaboration with town council and other advocates. So we're really happy to see that. I've also, I think, seen really great changes at the Ajax Library. I live in Ajax, I grew up here and in Pickering, and I've been visiting the Ajax Library my whole life. And I saw years ago how much Islamophobic content was on the shelves and how much that has changed, where there's much more diversity of writing available, covering many more experiences, many more diverse voices, critical of Islam, that's still there, and that's fair. People who want to criticize Islam as a religion rationally and write something academic or something that's looking at media coverage, that's well and good, and we're happy that the library has sources like that too. But it's also got strong Muslim voices reporting on everything from Sharia to spirituality to culture to traditions, and there's all kinds of things that, you know, if you search the library catalog, there's like thousands of titles come up now, not just books, but digital materials, movies, and audio files or audio resources rather. So I really encourage people to make use of those resources. Just in the interest of time, I'll just mention that our nonpartisan work extends so that Annemie Paul has now resigned from the Green Party of Canada, but while she was a candidate and running in the federal election, we had town halls with the leaders of all parties, including who was brutally killed by an Islamophobic attack, and the perpetrator is currently facing charges of hate crimes. One year since the time that he was killed, he had been distributing food to people who were visiting the mosque during the pandemic. So that's kind of a glimpse of some of the work that we do to address Islamophobia. We also do campaigns. And you can see here after the Quebec City mosque attack that Kubra Mir referred to and gave us some background on. One of the campaigns that we did nationally in partnership with other community organizations was to remember the Quebec City Mosque and to think about how we can make our communities safer and more inclusive. So we had this Green Square campaign, which is an annual campaign. You can see a shot there of the party leaders, including the Bloc Québécois and others wearing the Green Square. And we can see a member of parliament square, and we can see community members from across the country wearing the square. We encourage people to learn about that Green Square campaign from our website. This is just a quick example, and I won't talk at length about it. I referred to it before. We actually were happy to see that the city of Edmonton passed amendments to its bylaws on street harassment. And that was something that we worked hard on with local community members and other advocates. Something coming up that people should watch on social media. If you're not following the NCCM on social media, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. But definitely check out this hackathon against hate that we're putting on. Registration is closing October 13th. And the hackathon is going to be virtually and in person in Toronto from October 15th to the 17th, that weekend. And you can see here the jury is going to be represented by people in business and tech and media. And Facebook Canada, TikTok Canada, and Google Canada are also going to be providing feedback to participants who are, I think we're at about 80 participants representing about 19 different teams from across Canada. They are programmers, they are activists, and they're going to be developing tech-based solutions to counter online hate. The winner of the hackathon is going to be awarded a seed grant of $50,000 Canadian to start to implement their idea. And hopefully, if it starts to work, we can scale and support it going. That money is not coming from the tech companies. That money is being awarded through a grant that the NCCM is going to be providing. to maintain the team's independence in what solutions that they try to implement, and in the best interest of the public good. If you ever want to talk about Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate, anti-Muslim violence, if you want to think about solutions, you can email me at rmohammed@nccm.ca, and that toll-free number there, 1-866-524-0004. That's our national headquarters hotline. You can call it for anything regarding request for speakers, for educators, request for media engagement. You can call it to all kinds of inquiries through to our different departments. And so I hope that information is useful to any of you at any time. Thank you so much for your attention. Excuse me if I went over time, and I look forward to any questions or comments during the discussion period. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizwan, very much for your presentation. Before we move to the Q&A portion, we had a question about can people register to be a hackathon audience?
Yes, definitely. If you go to NCCM's Hackathon Against Hate, and we'll hopefully share a link in the chat, there's a registration link there. You can still register. We're until October 13th. Julia, do you, I think I shared that link with you the last meeting that we had. I don't know if you have it handy, but if you don't, I can find it while others are asking questions.
Yep, I have put the link to the hackathon in the chat. So anyone that is wishing to check it out can find it there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And if you have any trouble registering, please email me or call the number that was on my slide, and be happy to help.
Thank you so much. So I now would like to ask all of our panelists to join us and turn their cameras back on for our Q&A period. So the first question was for Badar, who was someone was asking, could you please tell us of any incidents of Islamophobia at the PIC? So Badar.
Sure. We had an incident with broken windows at the mosque. Usually you get sort of some of the drive-by name calling sometimes, that not as prevalent, but the windows was a main event. So we took some precaution in terms of we were able to get some funding to erect a fence, which you weren't thinking of before, but we have that now in place, and security surveillance, just because we also have a school there as well where kids come in. You know, that was the main concern for us, for safety. And we also do get on occasion where we have some kids coming in and they require some sort of counseling because the fact they may have been called some names and so on and so forth. But yeah, we've had some incidences of hate.
Thank you. We also had a question about the book that Kubra mentioned, and I did say that we have ordered it from the library, so it should be in our catalog soon if anyone wants to check it out and place it on hold. So keep an eye out for that. The next question is from Christy. She asked, is there an opportunity to discuss the origin of Islamophobia and why it is used versus anti-Muslim hate? Islamophobia seems more passive and just as a lack of understanding versus anti-Muslim hate, which is intentional and rooted in white supremacy. Dr. Perry, do you have any thoughts about the difference between those two terms?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. We've really been using the term Islamophobia probably since the 1990s, really. And I think it was the Runnymede report in the UK that really solidified that term as the one that we would use to describe anti-Muslim hate. And there was a lot of criticisms of it. I mean, there was a lot of acceptance of it because it was sort of an effective umbrella term. And it really, I mean, it does mean more than lack of understanding. As the Runnymede defined it, it really did refer to anti-Muslim hatred, hostility, fear and anxiety and misrepresentation of Islam as well. And I think that that's how most of us understand it. I mean, the problem with the phobia piece, and I say this about, you know, homophobia and transphobia as well, is that phobia means an irrational fear. And in a culture like ours, where we learn Islamophobia, where we learn to hate, as Kubra describes so well, right? We learn to hate through our key institutions, through our media, through our parents at the dinner table, that sort of thing. There's nothing irrational about that hatred. It is something that we have taught. So, I think that in the best of all possible worlds, we would use the term anti-hate, anti-Muslim hatred. Islamophobia has become a comfortable and sort of inclusive umbrella term. I think that we use in its place, but I think most of us still understand that as, as Christy suggests, as embedded in white supremacy and Orientalism as well. So yeah, I think that the two terms are often used interchangeably, but absolutely the more precise term is probably anti-Muslim sentiment or anti-Muslim hate.
Thank you. Did anyone else from our panel like to add anything in regards to that question?
Yeah, if I could add something very quickly, I just want to build off of what Dr. Perry's saying. I agree with everything that she said so well. I think one of the things that we've also seen, because I participated in the International Islamophobia Studies Conference that brings together scholars working on Islamophobia from many countries around the world. And one of the things that we see happen is when this term gets discussed and debated, we've sort of reached a kind of academic consensus that there's it's an established field now, since the 90s. It's kind of it's got some nuances, it's got some disagreements about some of the key features that it has, especially in different countries and in different contexts, but it's useful. I think if people, I know lots of Muslims that don't like it, but when we think about its origins, one of the things that I would just add to what Dr. Perry's saying is that some Muslim advocates across Canada sort of see the roots of Islamophobia, violent Islamophobia, and systemic Islamophobia as coming out of an ideology of white supremacism or white supremacy. And this is a kind of, it's a specific kind of ideologically motivated extremist ideology, and sometimes it has violent forms, as we sort of see from neo-Nazi groups at times. So that's one approach to understanding it. Another sort of approach that you see among some Muslims, especially those that are sort of looking for resources within their religious tradition to understand it, is they see it coming out of ignorance and arrogance. And it's something, if you are interested in the literature, the sacred literature of Islam, and you can find some of it at the library, you can find in the Quran as well reference to this idea of a satanic or demonic character in the sacred scripture of Muslims who expresses supremacism over humanity on the basis of being made of fire, whereas human beings are made of earth. And so you start from the very early period of Muslim conceptions of the idea of where does supremacist ideation come from? Where do supremacist sentiments come from? It comes from ignorance and fear, but also arrogance. So something to think about.
Dr. Perry, if I can just sort of ask the question, one of the things that stood out for me was when you mentioned the element of normalization, basically, a normalization in terms of because it's so prevalent now in terms of hate that, both in media as well as from a personal point of view. When I came to Canada and as a child, and my experiences are similar to Kubra's, hate for me, personally speaking, was mixed in with, where I didn't belong. I wasn't a Canadian, I was a different color, and so on and so forth, and, language barrier, and, bullying was an element of it. So it was very real. It was nothing normal about it. And, in addition to that, my parents were, or a lot of immigrant parents were struggling just to make ends meet, that, this wasn't high on the echelon of things that are priorities, basically, right? Now, that was, for me, it was never normal, because that kind of, that affected my self-esteem growing up. It had a massive, massive impact for me in terms of how I viewed things, and made me want to challenged a lot of things actually growing up, and to what kind of defined what a Canadian really was, so what it's meant to be. And so I've been trying to figuring that out for the last 40 years. I've got a little bit of a better understanding today, but today is when you're seeing normalization, that's not what it was in the 70s. Today is different because now you have media that's more prevalent, and you have like world leaders who are also involved with this. It seems like at a different level. Can you sort of comment on that? My personal experience versus what today's the difference is?
Yeah, well, I mean, the experiences themselves have become normalized. That is taken for granted as part of the community experience. The other piece of it is that normalization of the sentiment and the narratives that we see. Someone had a question about, how damaging is it when elected officials, leaders refuse to even acknowledge Islamophobia. That is a part of the political rhetoric that normalizes Islamophobia. If we think about, this was it was the first anniversary after the mosque shootings, when the premier of Quebec said there is no Islamophobia in Quebec, so we don't need a national day recognizing Islamophobia. So that was a denial. We've heard it from Trump. We heard it from the previous conservative administration. So that becomes part of the everyday discourse, that the narratives become normalized and acceptable, and filter into not just the extremist online chatter, but political and popular online and offline chatter as well. And so that has obviously escalated. If we look at public opinion polls, right, the negative sentiments around Muslims and Islam have increased over the last 4 or 5 years. Hate crimes have increased. The acts of extreme violence against Muslims have increased as well. So yeah, absolutely. The experiences of Islamophobia are normative and taken for granted, and now, sadly, those ideologies and sentiments that contribute to it have become part of the normal conversation. Yeah, sad.
Very sad.
And hard to break through.
Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to ask if anyone else had any thoughts. Kubra, I see your hand up there.
Oh, I just wanted to say that we didn't really talk about our experience in Durham, right? I moved to Durham 10 years ago. It's been a very welcoming space. And I haven't had too many people being rude to me in Durham. And what I've also found is the schools are very accommodating. When we moved here, my daughters, I told them, we only eat halal, which is like kosher type food. And I sent it to the school. They started bringing that in. They brought in the marshmallows. There's a lot more accommodation. So I think from the time when I was growing up, it was a different world. And again, like brother was saying, my parents weren't educated. They didn't understand. They're struggling. They come to a new country. A lot of our families supported our, families back home, their parents, their siblings, economically, it was a different situation. So we're blessed. We have been raised in Canada. We have much more economic foundation that our own children can, enjoy. But people in Durham have been very accepting. And I really want to share one story that happened a few years ago. After the Quebec shooting, there was a gentleman, his name's Ryan. He ended up going to the mosque, Pickering Mosque, and he made a little sign and it said, free hugs. And I really love this story because he just started welcoming people. People were just coming in. There was a whole stream of people. And also I was part of a group. And what we did was we went around giving roses out. So after the Quebec shooting, all the people that reached out to us, I went to about 2 churches and I went to a synagogue, and they welcomed us in. We talked about it. And I thought, you know what, unfortunately, why do we have these crises, these times of these incidents where we come together? So I'm so glad that brother is doing some interfaith dialogues. This is so important, having these kinds of meetings, talking about these things. It's going to open things up and hopefully, raise some awareness. And we also, in our own communities, we have a bit of racism too. So let's talk about that, how we can be better as human beings. So, but anyways, this is a fantastic topic, and I'm really honored to be on this panel with such dynamic people. And, Rizwan's doing great work. And Dr. Perry, I just admire her so much. So thank you.
I know we're running a bit over time, but I just wanted to see, have one final question, and that is, what can individuals and our community do to help this issue? I would open it up to all our panelists. So Rizwan, can we start with you?
Yeah, so beyond addressing violent Islamophobia or violent anti-Muslim sentiment through amendment of calling for amendments to street harassment bylaws with ticketing authority, talking to our local councillors, our town councillors about this issue. I would say there are a number of things that we can do to address systemic Islamophobia in our town. If you're interested, I think what we should do is we should be looking at what community funding there is for local anti-Islamophobia initiatives. I know that the town of Ajax has grants that they reach out to different community groups about. We should be asking, like, have any community groups addressing hate been funded, and what were the results of their activities? We've done the town has done this really, I think, excellent initiative, Ajax for All, which I hope people will reach out to the diversity and inclusion coordinator, Natasha Sharma, about, because it's an important initiative. And Natasha, actually, I don't know her, so I'm taking liberty maybe just talking about her as if we know each other. But Natasha Sharma and others working in the town on diversity and inclusion have done a diversity and inclusion conference annually, and that's brought together many people to talk about racism and hate and inclusion in many forms. Has Islamophobia been a theme or been a feature? That's a question to ask from the town. If it has, how can we build on the good work that's been happening? I think one of the things that Kubra Mir's excellent slide presentation highlighted, and also Badar's, is the local history of whether it's Canada or specifically in Durham region. And I would welcome opportunities for people to sort of say, how can we institutionalize these kinds of this kind of knowledge? Can we educate more people about it through the library, through schools? I don't think, even as a Muslim growing up here and learning about Canadian Islamic history, that I'd ever seen the pictures that Kubra showed. And Badar's pictures actually reminded me of memories that I had, but I'd never seen pictures of those things. So I'm sure there would be some fascinating conversations that could happen from that. We're in Islamic Heritage Month, and the library has taken the initiative to put this together. It would be amazing if it was something that was institutionalized so that we could see that it's not just about celebrating Muslim achievement, but how can we do education to address systemic racism and hate, not just against Muslims, but against everybody that faces that for different reasons. So those are just some specific suggestions. There's more suggestions that we have. If you check out the link that Julia shared earlier in the chat of NCCM's recommendations, you can go to our website. It's a downloadable PDF that you can open up on your smartphone or on your desktop and read through, and feel free to talk to me about solutions that we're not talking about that you think we should consider, and we'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you so much. And Kubra, any thoughts on how the community can help, or final words tonight?
Okay, I would just like to say is thank you, Ajax Public Library. I have a whole showcase. So come out to our main library on Harwood. We have a local artist. Her name is Safia Malik. She's put together some beautiful artwork. And this year I'm on the board of Islamic History Month. We're talking about Islamophobia, the incident that happened in London. And the other topic is the indigenous people. We as Muslims are mourning that as well. So I've tried to illustrate that. And I've also have a smaller display at Pickering Library and at Whitby Library. So please take the time this month, go and see what we're doing. If you have questions, reach out to me as well. I really believe this is how we can change things. We need to educate people, make these resources available. Let's celebrate the culture. Let's celebrate the arts, the contributions Muslims have made to society, right? I think just having our children learn about this, it's going to make a whole generation change and hopefully more adapt to what other cultures and faiths are bringing in. So thanks again. It's at Ajax Library. So definitely check it out.
Thank you, Kubra. And Badar, any final thoughts or suggestions for how the community can support our Muslim community?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you. This is the first form of its kind that I've actually done a Zoom call on, so that's great feedback. Thanking also Dr. Perry for that really enlightening academic perspective in terms of why things happen, how they're happening, and I didn't realize that it was actually some of the numbers that she actually shared was mind-boggling. Now, from our perspective, from a local perspective, when it comes to the mosque and the community center, I think we need to do even a better job to sort of paint a more of a positive Muslim narrative. And the way we have to do that is through interaction. Interaction with our neighbors, interaction with our fellow faith community leaders from different faiths, politicians. So it's not just about stronger laws, and NCCM doing some amazing work in terms of bringing out and influencing so that we actually have stronger hate laws. That's definitely need to be there and strengthened. But also it's about changing the heart and mind of our neighbors, and that's going to only happen through interaction, positive reinforcement, and everyone that comes to the mosque, everyone that is involved with the mosque, is an ambassador to take that positive message out to help the community, so that when that narrative is falsely painted in the media, they can say, you know what, my experience with my local friend or neighbor or at the mosque has been a positive one. And this is why we really there are more guys like Ryan and his daughter coming and giving us hugs at the mosque than there are haters out there. So if we can sort of drown that out by having positiveness, I think that's the way for us to proceed. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Perry, any final words before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone has said, and thank you and the Ajax Public Library for hosting this. And I think that these sorts of events are a really good starting point. Other kinds of conversations, things that bring communities together. I mean, often we're speaking to the converted, right? To people who sort of are supportive of the community. So we also have to find ways to engage folks who might not be at the same table normally with us, and that's the real challenge, right? To bring the haters in so that they can learn something as well. But I also want to underscore the work that NCCM has done and their series of recommendations. And I really appreciate when I saw them, long before the summit. I just thought it was an amazing set of recommendations, because they, obviously we want to lobby the federal government and the provincial government, but to focus on the municipal role as well, I think was really important, because we sometimes forget that there are very localized dynamics to the way that Islamophobia and other forms of hate play out, and so often the local community is the best place to begin the initiatives to intervene, not just around violent Islamophobia, but around systemic forms of Islamophobia that are embedded in our own ways of doing things as a community. So I really applauded them and continue to applaud them for that. So I think we can continue to support the work that NCCM and CCMW and so many other really powerful Muslim organizations. We have to support the work that they're doing and support the lobbying and the advocacy that they're putting forward.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to give a huge thank you to our amazing panelists this evening, Dr. Barbara Perry, Badar Javaid, Kubra Mir, and Rizwan Mohammed. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us tonight and for providing such valuable information that will help our community to combat Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism. And thank you to our attendees also for joining us tonight. If you have any feedback about tonight's event, please feel free to share it in the chat. And thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their evening.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.